Hello, my name is Parul Khator, MD. I'm an ophthalmologist in Atlanta, Georgia, specializing in cataract and glaucoma surgeries. After practicing medicine for over a decade, I have learned that the more a patient knows about their disease, the better they do. Patient education is a passion of mine, but like most doctors, I have a lot of patients and not a lot of time to see them. So I created this podcast where I could spend the time I don't have during the day to give you insights into the eyeball and ocular disease. Let's empower you as a patient or a patient support system. Together, let's demystify the eye. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Demystify the Eye. Imagine you're driving down a one-lane road at night, and it begins to pour. Just buckets of water falling from the sky. You go to turn on your windshield wipers, and they don't work. How would you feel in that moment? I know I would panic. Everything out of the windshield would be blurry, smeared with rain. The streetlights and headlights of cars would have halos around them, and it would be hard to tell if you were in your lane or in the lane of oncoming traffic. That's a scary scenario, and unfortunately, that's exactly what patients with severe Fuchs Corneal Endothelial Dystrophy see. Pathophysiology. The cornea is the clear front portion of the eye. If you took a tiny sphere and you sliced it into thirds, the front third of the sphere would look like a cornea. It essentially has the shape of a dome. It is the first structure light goes through to get into our eyes, and one of its main jobs is to begin focusing that light into a fine point that will eventually hit the retina in the back of our eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. Well, the cornea is the window to the eyes. I guess that makes it the window to the soul. In order for the cornea to begin refracting or bending the rays of light, it needs to be clear. I mean crystal clear. But we know that every cell in our body eats food or oxygen and creates waste or debris. So how does a tissue comprised of these cells manage to stay completely clear while all this activity is going on? The answer lies in a layer at the very back of the cornea called the endothelium. If you remember from previous podcasts, all organs and tissues in our bodies have layers to them, and each of these layers serves a specific function. The cornea has 5 layers, and we will quickly review these from front to back. The layer of the cornea closest to the outside world is called the epithelium. The epithelium consists of 5 to 6 rows of cells stacked on top of each other. Think of these cells like bodyguards. They keep all the debris, bacteria, viruses, and general gunk of the outside world from entering the eye. They also keep the tears that wash over the front of our eye from flooding our cornea and making it cloudy or swollen. This epithelial layer is so important, our bodies will let us know in a dramatic way when it gets disrupted. You see, the cornea is innervated by cranial nerve 5, called the trigeminal nerve. Think of this nerve as a massive oak tree with the trunk of the tree or the root of the nerve located near your temple and in front of your ear. This massive oak tree splits into 3 major branches called a V1, V2, and V3. The V being the Roman numeral 5. The first branch of the tree, or V1, is also called the ophthalmic branch, and it goes on to form hundreds of even smaller branches with even smaller branches and so on and so forth. 70 to 80 of the smallest branches enter the cornea, and these bifurcate even further until they finally reach their nerve endings. How many of these nerve endings are located in the corneal epithelium? Approximately 7,000 free nerve endings per 1 millimeter squared. That is a mind mind-boggling amount of innervation. The cornea is, in fact, the most densely innervated tissue in our entire bodies. To give you an idea of what this means, think about how sensitive your skin is. Well, the cornea is about 400 times more sensitive than that because it has 400 times more nerve endings than your skin does. What this means is you will know without a shadow of a doubt if there is a disruption in the epithelial layer of your cornea. How? It will hurt, and you will tear and be unable to open your eyes. This is a good thing because if your defenses are down, making you vulnerable, wouldn't you want to know about it so you could get treatment to get better? I'm going to skip the next layer and move on to the meat of the cornea called the stroma. I call this layer the meaty layer because it makes up 90% of the volume of the cornea. This layer is made up of row upon row of tightly packed collagen fibrils that give the cornea its transparency. The stroma provides structure and strength to the cornea and helps it start to refract or bend light. At the bottom of the cornea is a layer of tissue called the Descemet's membrane. And though it is only 7 micrometers thick, this layer is important. It holds the final layer we will talk about next to the corneal stroma, and it is the gatekeeper that allows nutrients, aka food, into the stroma of the cornea. While all those other layers are great, the one I really want to focus on in this podcast is the endothelial layer of the cornea. Unlike the epithelium or stroma of the cornea, which have rows and rows of cells, this layer only consists of one row of cells called endothelial cells. These are only 5 micrometers deep, are shaped like polygons, and are packed in tight next to each other. These cells pump water out of the cornea, and this is what allows the cornea to be crystal clear. Every tissue in our body needs nutrients to stay alive, including the cornea. But if the cornea were to keep filling with nutrients, it would become hydrated or swollen. The endothelial cells keep pulling all the fluid that came into the cornea out to keep it dehydrated. Imagine you are rowing in a canoe in the middle of the lake. The canoe gets a hole in the bottom and begins filling up with lake water. What do? You grab your fishing bucket and immediately begin scooping and dumping the water out of your canoe. Think about your endothelial cells like a million tiny hands with tiny buckets all working together to drain that canoe. So what would happen if the endothelial cells were dysfunctional? If they don't work properly, the stroma of the cornea gets filled with fluid. That will end up looking like the windshield of a car in a thunderstorm when the windshield wipers aren't working. When tissues in our body get damaged or dysfunctional, they can regenerate. Think about a cut on your hand, for example. Your skin will fill that cut in with new skin cells. Well, here's where things get scary, folks. Your corneal endothelial cells cannot regenerate. This extraordinarily important single layer of cells cannot regenerate if it stops working. If you've ever seen the movie 300, you'll remember that King Leonidas explains that Spartans link arms together to form an impenetrable wall. The endothelium functions in the same way. All the cells need to be linked closely together without any gaps in order to be able to function. If endothelial cells are lost, all the endothelium can do is shift other healthy cells over to the area with lost cells and enlarge those healthy cells to fill in the gaps. Over time, this process takes its toll, and the remaining bloated cells simply cannot keep up. When these endothelial cells get stressed and begin to die away, we believe they produce spots of collagen that get deposited on the back of Descemet's layer. Remember, this is that skinny layer that connects the endothelial cells to the remaining stroma. These bulges or pockmarks will scatter the light passing through the cornea, and this is not good. Remember, once light enters our eye, it has to become focused to a single spot on our retina in order for us to see clearly. Anything that causes light scatter will result in blurry vision. Etiology. Where in the world did the name Fuchs endothelial dystrophy come from anyways? I mean, it is really a mouthful. Fuchs stands for the ophthalmologist who first discovered the disease. Fuchs endothelial dystrophy is a deterioration of the endothelial cells of the cornea and the development of guttae. When we use the term dystrophy in medicine, it usually refers to a disease that a person is born with, as opposed to a disease a person acquires over their lifetime. It also means a condition is likely to be genetic and therefore hereditary. In Fuchs, the genetic mutation which creates this disease can be spontaneous, in which case a patient may have no known family history. Or the mutation can be hereditary in an autosomal dominant fashion. If you remember Mendel and his pea plants from high school, you will remember that autosomal dominant genes can be passed down easier than autosomal recessive genes. So if one of your parents has Fuchs corneal dystrophy, you yourself have a 50% chance of getting the disease. However, the gene defect also has variable expressivity. This means you could have a mild case of the disease, and your dad could have a severe case, and your daughter could have a case somewhere in the middle. The disease is also progressive, meaning it wants to get worse over time. What sort of time are we talking about here? Usually 20 to 30 years. Phew! So this means Fuchs is generally slow going. I have patients with Fuchs endothelial dystrophy I have been watching for 12 years with no change at all. Stages and symptoms. Patients that are born with Fuchs endothelial dystrophy don't show signs of the disease right away. In fact, a patient usually has to be in their 30s or 40s before we eye doctors can see signs of it. And that same patient will likely not notice symptoms from the disease until they are in their 50s. So what are the symptoms of Fuchs corneal dystrophy? Well, this depends on the stage of the disease a patient is in. There are 4 stages total, and they can span 20 to 30 years. In other words, Fuchs is generally a slow-moving condition. In stage 1, we can see the little pock marks or guttae on the back of your cornea, but you don't really have symptoms. I'm not a cornea specialist, so most of the patients I see are in this pretty benign stage. In stage 2, the condition progresses, and the cornea actually begins to decompensate or lose its functionality. It starts to swell. This is where the rain-slicked windshield analogy comes into play. Patients will complain of blurry vision, a hard time driving at night due to decreased night vision, glare or halos around lights, pain when they blink. This is because as the cornea swells, the surface becomes irregular. Imagine blinking over a smooth sheet of glass versus blinking over a piece of sandpaper. Ouch! There are 2 things that happen in this stage, and they both have to do with timing of symptoms. The first is that a patient's symptoms are generally the worst, first thing in the morning. This is because when we sleep, our lids are closed and there is no evaporation that occurs across the front surface of our cornea. So when we wake up, our corneas are the most swollen they will be. Not a big deal if we have a fully functioning pump that is clearing the water out at a fast rate. If we have an impaired pump, however, big problem first thing in the morning. The second interesting thing is that a person's glasses prescription will fluctuate as the day goes on. This also has to do with the cornea being most swollen first thing in the morning and getting more and more dehydrated as the day goes on. When the cornea is swollen, it's big or thick. When it is more dehydrated, it is thinner. A thicker cornea will refract or bend light completely differently than a thin cornea. So the thick cornea will require a completely different eyeglass prescription than the thin cornea. I had a patient once who came to see me, and she was really closed off and defensive when I walked in the room. Her arms were crossed, and she was almost angry at me, though we had just met. I talked to her about what was going on with her vision, and her answers were short, just one word at a time. Then I looked at her corneas and saw the classic signs of stage 2 Fuchs corneal dystrophy, with a corneal guttae and corneal edema. I asked her how many pairs of glasses she had, and her jaw dropped. She uncrossed her arms, and this giant smile broke out on her face, along with tears in her eyes. I'm not going to lie, I started eyeing the door, wondering how fast could I get out if I needed to. She said she had 4 pairs of glasses, and everyone around her had told her she was crazy, or they had made fun of her. She kept telling her family and friends she couldn't see, and she kept going to the eye doctor to get another pair of glasses, and she kept switching glasses from morning to afternoon to evening. She was the laughing stock of her family. Every time she brought up her vision, the eye rolling would begin. But she wasn't crazy. She was experiencing the fluctuations in vision characteristic of the stage of Fuchs dystrophy. So if stage 2 is this bad, what does stage 3 look like? In stage 3, the cornea gets so swollen it develops something called bullae. These are literal blisters on the front surface of the cornea, between the skin of the cornea and the next layer. These bullae are easily visible when we look at your eyes with our slit lamp. They look like giant bubbles. These bullae distort the vision even further. Worse, they can pop or burst. I'm sorry, did I hear that right? You did. These blisters on the surface of the eye can burst. Well, does that hurt? Heck yeah, it hurts. It hurts a lot. I'm a bit afraid to ask, but what is stage 4 all about? Well, thankfully in the U.S., most patients never get to stage 4 because we have widely available medical care and we will treat Fuchs before someone can go into stage 4. But we do still see stage 4 Fuchs in third world countries. Imagine you pick at a scab again and again for years. Eventually, you will develop a scar. Same thing with the cornea. In stage 4, the cornea has been so traumatized it eventually scars. This is called subepithelial scarring, and it turns the crystal clear cornea gray or white. You can see this white cornea from across the room. You no longer need one of our microscopes. Now imagine that crystal clear window you are looking through is frosted glass. Vision generally plummets in this stage. It can be so poor, patients may only be able to see motion or the outlines of objects. Interestingly, because the cornea is no longer being acutely traumatized, but has now developed scarring, pain actually goes away in this stage. Prevalence. There are 2 types of Fuchs corneal dystrophy. One is early onset, meaning it starts when a person is in their 30s. The other is late onset, meaning the disease starts when a patient is in their 50s. I hate to break it to you, ladies, but we are at much higher risk of developing this disease. How much higher? If there was a waiting room full of patients with Fuchs, for every 1 man in the waiting room, there would be 3 women. In the United States, approximately 4% of people over the age of 40 have Fuchs dystrophy. Interestingly, this disease is super rare in some countries. For example, there are very few cases of this in Japan or Saudi Arabia. Diagnosis. Now let's imagine you are a patient who has a mom with Fuchs corneal dystrophy, and you've been noticing degradation of your vision. Let's walk through what your typical experience in my office would look like. The first thing I will want to see is a measure of your vision. So I'll have you read the eye chart for us. There are 2 types of vision in ophthalmology, uncorrected vision and best corrected vision. We are interested in your best corrected distance and reading vision. This means your vision when you're wearing your glasses or when we do your 4-opter, that's the Better 1, Better 2 exam. Once I know what your vision is, I will do a glare test on you. This means I will dim the lights in the room and shine a bright light in your eye at an oblique angle to see if this reduces your vision further. Remember, glare around lights is one of the hallmark features of corneal dystrophy, so we want to be able to document how bad this glare is. You will then bring your face into the slit lamp. That is our very powerful upright microscope. It allows us to see your eye in very fine detail. I'll look at your cornea to see if I see those guttae we talked about earlier. They look like little pock marks on the back of your cornea. I'll also look for signs of swelling or water retention in your cornea, and I'll see if there are any areas you are starting to develop scar tissue. Now, imagine with me for a moment that you are a patient we know has Fuchs Corneal Dystrophy, and you are coming in to see if it is getting worse. It's been 6 months since your last exam, and in the interim, I have seen thousands of patients. You are important to me, but I cannot rely on my memory to know exactly what your cornea looked like 6 months prior. So I use some objective measures of your cornea to see if you are stable or worsening. One of these objective tests is called a specular microscopy evaluation. A specular microscope is basically an optical reflection microscope. We shine a thin beam of light onto your cornea. That light gets reflected back onto your corneal endothelium, and we take a picture. We are essentially photographing a portion of your corneal endothelial cells. That's perfect, as this is the tissue that gets damaged in Fuchs dystrophy. The microscope can count the number of your endothelial cells and can show us if your cells are pretty consistent in size and shape as normal cells should be. If your endothelial cells vary in size, this is called polymegathism. And if they vary in shape, it is called pleomorphism. Polymegathism and pleomorphism are hallmarks of Fuchs dystrophy. So if we take this picture each time you come in, we can tell if your disease is stable or if it is progressing. Now imagine you have seen me for 5 years and you ask me, "How am I doing, doc? Is my disease getting worse?" I can put the 10 printouts of your corneal endothelium side by side and look from the first picture to the last and visually see if you are stable or not. Another objective measurement important in Fuchs dystrophy is the pachymetry measurement. A pachymeter looks like a giant pen. It has a probe with a tip on it. After anesthetizing your cornea, we can push the tip of this probe onto the very center of your cornea, and the machine will take several rapid measurements of the thickness of the cornea, from the very first epithelial layer all the way to the endothelial layer. This is a great way to see if your cornea is swelling over time. Finally, I will look at the rest of your eye, from behind the cornea all the way to your optic nerve, located in the very back of your eyeball. I do this to ensure there is no other source of vision loss, such as glaucoma or macular degeneration or cataracts. This is important as some of these diseases, especially cataracts, can produce the same symptoms as Fuchs corneal dystrophy. Cataract surgery. Let's say you are a patient with Fuchs dystrophy as well as cataracts, and you are now getting ready to have cataract surgery. Do we need to do anything differently for you? Yes, we absolutely do. You see, to remove your cataract, we use an ultrasound probe. The probe enters your eye through a tiny wound in your peripheral cornea. The space we work in to remove your cataract is called the anterior chamber. This fluid-filled pocket of space is between the corneal endothelium and the lens. The ultrasound probe is aimed backwards toward your lens. The ultrasound energy breaks your cataract up into 1,000,000 pieces. It essentially liquefies your cataract, and then a vacuum attached to the probe suctions the liquefied cataract out of your eye. Even though the ultrasound probe is aimed away from the cornea, you can imagine that some ultrasound energy could still get to those corneal endothelial cells, not to mention fragments of the cataract itself that fly around as the cataract gets broken up. To understand this better, imagine a construction worker bulldozing through a brick wall. There is debris flying everywhere, and the bulldozer is just vibrating away. Now, imagine that a few feet behind the construction worker is a thin piece of glass. The goal is to bulldoze through the wall without smashing the glass. Seems like a pretty dicey situation, right? The good news is we can use what are called corneal precautions at the time of your cataract surgery to protect the fragile layer of corneal endothelial cells from getting damaged. To do this, we put a layer of thick, protective jelly into the eye and use it to coat the back of the cornea. This jelly is called Viscoat. We actually use it on everyone who is having surgery. After all, everyone's corneas deserve protecting. We just do more reapplications for patients whose corneas are extra vulnerable. We may also slow down the speed at which we remove the cataract in order to control the debris that is produced. We may also change the technique with which we take the cataract out. Instead of moving the cataract up into the anterior chamber to break it into pieces, we may chip away at it deeper inside the eye. Finally, we will take extra steps to keep the pressure low the night after surgery. A pressure spike in the eye really stresses out those fragile endothelial cells, so we may give a patient additional medication at the end of the case to go home with to keep the pressure nice and low overnight. Treatment. Fuchs corneal dystrophy is treated most definitively with surgery. However, there are a few things that can be done prior to surgery to alleviate a patient's symptoms and stave the surgery off for a while. One of these treatments is with an eye drop or an eye ointment called Muro 128. Muro 128 is available over the counter. It is basically a hypertonic saline solution or gel. Think about a drop of salt water. When you put this in your eye, it will pull the extra fluid inside the cornea out. This goes back to 5th grade math. Think about two fluids of different concentrations placed on either side of a semi-permeable barrier. The concentrations will want to even out, so the water from the lower concentration side will move to the higher concentration side. The same concept applies here. Now, what do you think it feels like to put a drop of salt water in your eye? That's right, folks. It hurts a lot. So there is 5 minutes of intense stinging and burning for the drop to start doing its thing. However, it can be really helpful, especially if a patient wakes up each morning with blurry vision. They can put the ointment in their eye at night before they go to bed, and by the time they wake up, there will be less corneal swelling. Or if a patient does well until dinner time, they can put a drop in a few hours before dinner time to start pulling that excess fluid out. We talked earlier about how swelling of the cornea can lead to an irregular surface, which is painful. Patients with Fuchs who are not yet ready for surgery sometimes choose to wear a soft contact lens to treat the pain. The contact lens acts like a Band-Aid, coating that irregular surface and making it smooth again. The Muro drops and the contact lens are only temporizing measures. To really treat Fuchs dystrophy, you have to do something about those lost corneal endothelial cells. We already talked about how they cannot be regenerated, so they must be replaced. Now, 30 years ago, the only way we could replace this layer was by replacing the entire cornea. This is called a penetrating keratoplasty. Essentially, we would use a circular blade to remove a circular piece of corneal tissue from front to back from the center of a patient's eye. We would then do the same thing with a human cadaveric cornea. We would then sew the cadaveric circle of cornea back into the living patient's cornea. As you can imagine, this was a huge surgery. There were lots of stitches, a long healing time as the grafted cornea fully scarred into the host cornea. There were also lots of refractive errors as it was difficult to control the shape of the new cornea. It might be too steep, too flat, or irregular, creating leftover myopia, hyperopia, or astigmatism. And then there was the issue of rejection. Any organ transplant is susceptible to this. To prevent it, patients would have to be on steroid drops for a long time, which could lead to other issues like glaucoma. Thankfully, brilliant minds in our field said, it doesn't really make sense to transplant all 5 layers of the cornea when the problem is really only in the back layer. Could we somehow only transplant the back layer? And then those brilliant minds found a way to do it, creating the 2 modern-day corneal surgeries now used to treat patients with Fuchs dystrophy. The first surgery that was created was called DSEK, standing for Decime Stripping Endothelial Keratoplasty. In this surgery, only the corneal endothelium, the overlying Decime's membrane, and a tiny bit of the corneal stroma is transplanted. Then, to improve upon this, DMEK evolved. DMEK stands for Decime's membrane endokeratoplasty. In this surgery, only the corneal endothelium and the overlying Decime's membrane is transplanted. None of the stroma or meat of the cornea is switched out. The first time I watched one of my corneal partners perform this surgery, my jaw dropped. It is, as you can imagine, a very delicate and tricky procedure. To remove just this few micrometers of tissue from a patient's eye and then from a cadaver eye is mind-boggling. To bring this oh so very thin layer of tissue freshly cut from the cadaver eye into the patient's eye in the correct orientation, meaning with the right side facing up, without damaging those fresh new endothelial cells is beyond me. There are only a few stitches used, so the surgeon relies on an air bubble to tamponade the transplanted tissue to the patient's stroma in order to get the two to stick. Patients heal so much faster with these surgeries. There's really such minimal scarring that occurs. Once the new endothelial cells are in and stick to the host cornea, they immediately get to work to start pumping the excess fluid out of the cornea. As you can imagine, these surgeries will only work as long as a patient does not have scarring, only swelling. If they have scarring, they will need the full thickness corneal transplant procedure. If a patient's Fuchs is severe enough at the time of cataract surgery, a surgeon may elect to remove the cataract and then go ahead and do the corneal transplant at the same time. There are pros and cons to this combined technique and something to discuss with your surgeon. Conclusion. Fuchs endothelial corneal dystrophy shows us how delicate the cornea is and how important it is to protect this vital portion of our eyes. It shows up in both eyes in adulthood and fortunately usually progresses slowly. If the disease is severe enough, the bad news is you are looking at going to the operating room. The good news, however, is that the surgical approach to this disease has drastically improved, and the chances of success are in your favor. Creating this podcast episode has made me want to grab a bottle of Windex and clean all the windows in my house. I think I will leave you to go do just that, if you feel the same way I do. Until next time, see well and be well. So, what do you think an eyeball feels like?
It feels like a bouncy ball.
That's actually a pretty good description. What do you think it feels like if we were talking about food?
Like, it feels like an olive.
Yeah, that's not bad. I would probably say it feels more like a grape. Pretty squishy. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.